Hello and welcome to the CiviWiki weekly meeting. Today is Monday, April 16th, 2018.
Mitchell, can you please mute your mic when you're not talking? It's not a win.
Sorry, I just moved over somewhere that there's less wind, but yeah, I'm going to try to do that.
Mitchell is mouth breathing on the microphone. My name is Briley Christopher Oxley, and I'm joined by
Joe Grassel,
Paul Scheid.
And Jimmy Lee.
Yep. And Mitchell West. So I'll just jump in. I know that I wasn't able to be at the last meeting. I know a couple people weren't there. So a few things I wanted to start off with, just as a general thing. If you're not going to be able to make it to the meeting, do try and shoot me an email just ahead of time so we can know if you're not going to make it to the meeting. It's okay, but it's just better so we're not trying to wait for people at the meeting. And then secondly, if you are on the go, I am learning that this call-in feature does make it a little bit easier to join the call, even if you are not necessarily in a great Wi-Fi zone. That said, I wanted to try and jump into the meeting, and as per usual, we'll just have developers mention what they've gotten done since we last spoke, and what we're looking to do next week, and any barriers we have for it. And then the big ticket issues that I wanted to talk about, I know we had privacy concerns on the table at the last meeting I was at. I think it'd be good for us to cover that briefly. And then I want to talk about trying to hit an additional release goal. And for me, that is tied to potentially developing the time-sensitive civic discussions and voting periods. So with that said, if we could jump in maybe with Juhi followed by Joe to give an update on what we've gotten done in the last week or 2 weeks, depending on when you're at the last meeting, and then what projects you're looking at particularly to target, and we'll talk about what we need to do to make that happen. So, Juhi, do you mind taking it off?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I was tied up a few weeks, but I was able to get the pull requests for the Django REST framework in finally. I did address some of the security concerns and limited a few things in terms of accessing the user file or user account information. But the basic API system is there, and I did use an auto-documenting program as recommended per document by the official REST API documentation. And that should get the basics going for anyone who wants to use it. It's pretty straightforward for now, and it should help the development process of anyone who wants to use it without explicitly writing out, read or write functions. So that's going. So if Briley or anyone else can review it, that would be great. And then I guess my plan for the next coming week is to kind of get at the low-hanging fruits that have been left behind. I see some bugs on the list that I can just quickly tackle, so I'm going to tackle those, and then whatever else we come to in this meeting.
Fantastic, yeah. And if you take on any of those bugs, do make sure to assign them to yourselves so that if someone else is coming in picking up some of these low-hanging fruit, people know who's working on what. But that sounds good. It sounds like, does anyone have any comments on the REST API if anyone's wanting to take on the review process, or if anyone's been looking at the code already? I know that at an earlier meeting, Gordon had mentioned that it was in reasonable order to help with his projects. Is it in order for everybody to ensure that they can move forward with their projects?
I can help review the code. I think it would be good for other of our developers to start looking at that, as it's the Django REST framework, from my perspective, is going to be become more central to this project.
Fantastic, thank you, Bradley. Yeah, and I don't know, Paul, would you want to take a look at the REST API as well, real quick?
Let's go ahead and ping, for example, Goku or one of our kind of new developers who are making strides into the code base. I think that would be good just to get their eyes on it so they can ask any questions or start to get a sense of how Django REST framework is organized.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Well, we might move on then to Gordon's update, and Gordon will have that as one of the things on your list essentially for next week. Just do a quick review of that, get familiar with it, and make sure it has everything you need for the project you're working on. But that said, maybe you could start off by giving us an update on what you've gotten done in the last week or so.
Gordon had to go offline.
Sorry, I meant Joe.
Oh, yeah. So I pretty much finished up the CSV export function, I believe. So that should be good to go. And then as far as the code linting, we basically have two options. I could do a sort of a custom tool with Flake 8 and the Code Climate CLI, which is like the Dockerized container. Or we could just go with the regular Code Climate, just standard edition, which is you use their website for it, I guess. And you hook up your GitHub repo, which I believe requires the repo owner to do that.
I'd say for the first step, let's go with that. Option B, just for simplicity's sake. That way we don't have to manage any other infrastructure.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Mitchell, would you care to take that task? I think it's pretty straightforward on the code.
What is the main task there? Please clarify.
Yeah, there's this service. Or excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So basically, it's like code linting, looking for like improving style and stuff within the code, and just like checking for basic errors and stuff.
And the service is called Code Climate. It's actually based on open source software. I believe they open source their platform. They also have a software as a service. So is it codeclimate.com? Codeclimate.org?
I think it might be .org.
Okay. So Mitchell, if you'll consider, this is optional, but we need a product owner to register on Code Climate and follow their steps to enable the Code Climate to scan the CiviWiki repository. I think it's only a few.
Yeah, no, that sounds
clicks.
good. I can definitely jump on and open an account, and I might run into some issues. If I do, I will shoot it up on Riot or shoot out an email to somebody.
All right, sounds good. And that is issue number 46. Sorry, 44, right? Is that correct? Automatically audit, monitor source code quality metrics. So Mitchell, I will assign you to this issue number 44, just so you have, so we're able to follow along. You and Delta, and Joe. So
sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Code Climate, yeah, and the link is there in the issue description, issue number 44.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And so, so then with Joe, you were saying that you wanted to. So if I'm logging that on, one, you were going to look over the API REST framework just to get accustomed to it, and then what other tasks are you looking to do in the coming week?
So for the next week, I'll probably look over some more of the prioritized backlog, or if there's like any more of those add ID tasks, I do a couple of those maybe.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Let me see. One cool, so to speak, task, from my perspective at least, is updating our project to Python 3. I don't know. And basically, that's just kind of right now means setting up a Python 3 virtual env instead of Python 2.7 and running CiviWiki and just opening bugs for any error you encounter. Some of them are really easy to solve, and I started that process. So that might be just something that we have in progress already. Be a good way to get moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I will note that we should definitely link Gordon into that, because I know that
Yeah.
on his project he was adding comments to his code to note if there was any differences between 2.7 and 3 that would be impacted. So if we look at his pull requests, he might already have some of that commented into his code that just needs to be reverted into actual issues.
Okay, cool. And I guess I'm not sure what pull request. There's no pull request linked to that yet. Let me see. Maybe did he open
He wasn't doing it as a pull request. It was just something that he had talked to me that he noticed while he was working on his project.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So that's something that we just maybe I'll reach out to him on Riot just to make sure and get a clarification of anything he's done on that, and he might be the best person to go through with his particular code and just convert all of his comments over to issues.
That's a good idea. Yeah, if he, actually, let's break it down that way. Let's ask Gordon to create issues for all of his comments, if you'll ask him that. Joe, would you consider actually opening a branch and pull request to start making the changes? And the cool thing about having the branch on GitHub is that even if you are struggling or for whatever reason have to put that work down, we'll have all that work preserved and can continue it. Like I could come in and help and make a small adjustment on the work in progress. Would that sound like a good way to tackle that issue?
Which issue is that again?
Issue number 18. It's been a long-standing one of our original ones, not so much long-standing, but it was one of the early. Let's see. I'll assign you to it so you see it easier. Delta plus. So
Is that the update to Python 3.1?
Yeah, issue 18. So
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure how extensive the changes will be, but one main principle is like to try to keep our dependencies as up to date as possible, and particularly Python 3's been out for a long time, and Django 2 just was released, so I want to get this project up to snuff with both of those developments in conjunction with the other features we want to move into the scope. But those are, when you work through tasks like that, like upgrading to Python 3 or Django, that makes you touch a lot of parts of the code. So you start learning through osmosis how our code is structured and what certain parts are doing.
Yeah, I can try that out.
All right, cool.
That sounds good. So it looks like we've got some clear project goals for Juhi and Joe, and I'll reach out to Gordon to give him an update on his comments and to actually edit those. But the next thing I wanted to raise as a potential issue was the concept that we've talked about, and I think we've talked about it on Lumio, and I may have opened up an issue for it on GitHub, I believe I did a while ago, is the issue of adding this timer system to kind of make our discussion threads a little bit more timely, more likely to be shared, more likely to try and work through this. Now, since it's a theory, like the Lumio discussion didn't get us very far in terms of saying, okay, this is the way we want the system to work or not, I was thinking that it might be a good idea to make a separate branch of CiviWiki and add in this feature of just a timer that times how long you can add new civies, and then subsequently how long you can vote on civies before it will export a data file of the voting. And I was thinking that if we made that on a separate branch of CiviWiki, we could test that a little bit, see if it's a feature that adds value and without disrupting our current system. I was going to raise that as a potential issue. Oh, and while I'm talking about this, before we move on to that, one other thing I wanted to mention for Joe is I wouldn't mind if we took just a test thread that we have and exported a data file, so I could just take a look at what the exported data files look like. Joe, would you be able to do that? And then we'll move on to discussing this timeliness issue.
Yeah, I can upload a test CSV file to the pull request. That'd be fine.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you so much. And so then separately, the issue of what do people think about trying to develop a timer system to where there's a certain period of time that people can add to a discussion, followed by a certain period of time where voting can occur. Do people like the idea of making a separate branch and trying to test that? And if it goes well, we would call it like a release 3. If it doesn't, you know, we don't like how it works, you know, it might be just something that doesn't get implemented fully. But I was going to propose try to get that, because I feel like what we need is something that makes the CiviWiki thread a little bit more viral, a little bit more like people want to share and invite people to discuss with them on it.
Well, just a general point of sort of our development process is that all new development takes place in a separate branch. So in that sense, you know, we already follow that practice for the kind of reasons sort of you illustrate. Like, we don't want to put experimental code in the main, you know, deployment branch or things like that, and we want to give ourselves some time to even, you know, test the code. And you're saying, you know, we also just want to test the idea, get a kind of a proof of concept together. I think that makes sense. Considering the timeliness of that work, I think there's already quite a lot in the 0.2 scope. We have even, you know, some of these are kind of housekeeping issues. It certainly could be moved into a later, you know, release milestone. But for example, we have a concept for simplified CiviWiki design, which I think we were, if my recollection serves it, we were wanting to implement some of that. So I would say before committing us to a new feature, that it would be kind of slipstreaming into our current prioritized backlog, in fact, bypassing the queue. So from a project kind of management or governance standpoint, I don't think that's good process. We can certainly organize the priorities to get that to a higher priority, but I'm hesitant to just kind of put it right there in front without taking into account what else is tagged with 0.2 milestone.
And that's completely fair. Though I thought that the main feature of simplified civies was something that Juhi had already finished. Is that correct, Juhi? Where are we on the simplified civvy structure? Because I thought we hadn't implemented the ability to say like
civvy structure should already be there.
Okay, so that's
some of it. Yeah.
101 just needs to be closed.
But the timeline. Yeah, the timeline thing, I do agree that it's a time-consuming task that we can't just fit in. But we could probably find a time for it later. Which do we want to? We can easily just fit it in a later timeline, right? Just not now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, well, what I was trying to set up then is when we might get to it, because to me it looks like we've got a lot of housekeeping issues on milestone 2, and the main feature was the simplified civies. So I feel like we're close to being able to do the milestone 2 release. And in my mind, this would, yes, be then the next step, aiming for a milestone 3, which would be this additional feature.
Yeah.
But it seems like the last couple of weeks we've been mainly working on housekeeping things aside from the data export. So if we've got the simplified civies and a data export, which I believe we have done as of this week, the majority of the tasks we're throwing out at this point are housekeeping or things to keep our code clean and stuff. And it's important, but I kind of want to try and push towards a feature that, could make the system more usable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was really, burnt at a project where a lot of features got kind of pushed through the works. And even our product owner, who I worked with, left the organization because it was just so ineffectively run, and we had so many people vying to get this feature or that feature in for various reasons, well-intentioned reasons. And so I have this kind of deeply seated concern, and not to say that we have a pattern of doing that here, but I really want to honor the process. And I agree that this sounds like a good feature for a 0.3 release, but I don't want to rush the 0.2 release, given that we're not really on a strict sprint timeline or anything like that. I think we could also do good to have some time set aside for backlog gardening, kind of, maintaining the backlog and the milestones as a team or in collaboration. That way our kind of priorities don't seem so static, but we have the agility, we have the ability to kind of change the course within reason, you know.
And I agree, and I really appreciate you. Yeah. You
Yeah,
can go, Doogie.
so since yeah, so just so that it's not all lost in the works, why don't we just categorize the issue in terms of milestone point 3, and then we can revisit this issue later on when we get to that milestone.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Which
The
issue number is
issues
it?
uncategorized.
Is
It is issue 152.
Okay, cool. Do you want to put that in the 03 milestone?
Yep.
All right, thanks. Dockerize CiviWiki project and dependencies. Also, I thought that was under works in progress. And now that I've got this backlog column open. 03. By the way, does everybody have the waffle board up, or can you see my screen? Let me see if I share my screen. This is our kind of common point of reference. It gives us a little bit of better way to organize and prioritize our work than the GitHub interface alone. It's all the data comes from GitHub, but this adds another dimension of the columns. So it's the Kanban-oriented tasks. So this would I would be saying that we should sit down and set aside maybe like a half-hour session once every couple of weeks to also double check that we're on the right trajectory, whether or not the priorities, the prioritized backlog and the milestone labels in the ready column reflect like the urgency of some of the things that may have come up in the backlog or otherwise through discussion.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's a good plan for us to put it on milestone 3 and to do a regular check-in on the waffle board. How do you propose? So, are you proposing a separate meeting or just individually checking in and trying to organize that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a lot of capacity for another meeting, but typically, or like in my experience, you've got to sit down and just block out some time. So yeah. Yeah, maybe we can come back to that next week. Let's table that discussion for now. Let's see.
Sounds good. That sounds good. And I'll do some thinking because maybe it's something that we could have like a subcommittee type of thing to where me and one other person talk through and try and keep the waffle board organized. And I will say, Brother, I do appreciate you. You've brought a ton of organization to this project, and so I just want to note that I appreciate when you bring up these procedural methods for trying to keep the open source project better organized.
Cool, thanks. I'm glad to hear that. Even things that, so not to belabor this issue, I know I just said to table it, but even things like adding labels can be done, asynchronously, so to speak. Anything, by the way, that has a milestone on it should probably be in our prioritized backlog and have a label. So that stuff doesn't necessarily take a sit-down meeting, but looking at the overarching goals and priorities, that's something that usually takes sort of a more, as you kind of mentioned, a committee-like approach. And just also closing issues and making sure anything that's in progress is in progress column, stuff like that. So it's everybody's part of this gardening effort. Are we still?
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like. Oh, sorry for interrupting.
Are we still hiring, for example, issue 119?
We can reopen hiring. I had taking on a couple of people. I wanted to make sure that we weren't overwhelming ourselves managing which chunks of the project to take on. I do have a small backlog of candidates that I could reach out to from the last post, but I would want to make sure that we have capacity to keep the team organized. I didn't want to flood us with too many candidates immediately, though now that we have Gordon and Joe kind of better acclimated to the team, I think that there is the possibility of bringing on additional people.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, I just found, sorry I'm like going all over the place, but I opened up our backlog column and I realized we haven't been gardening it at all, and I mainly should take the so to speak, the blame for that because that's been my role so far. But I found an issue number 141 that says add ID to CiviLinks field. I put it in the ready column. Basically what I'm trying to do is move anything for the 02 milestone into our prioritized backlog and closing out issues. If we're not hiring anymore, back to that, issue 119, Mitchell, I don't know if some of these got reopened or if this 119 just never got closed. But it's been open for
Well,
2
yeah,
months.
what we might do is we could close that for now and reopen it. I did consider it essentially the 2 hires that we made. I felt it was a good step without just going overboard. And especially if we're going to bring on more hiring, I would want to have a clear goal for the skill set that we want to bring in and what projects we're going to put those new developers on.
Cool. Okay, well, we're at 28 past the hour. Were there any other topics that you wanted to bring up, Mitchell?
The only other issue I'd mentioned was if we wanted to discuss any of the privacy issues really quick, but we have talked about that in a couple of separate meetings, so I don't want to take too much time on it. But I did want to have an opportunity for people to raise any issues if they're concerned about the current state of privacy on the project.
Juhi, did you mention that as part of your pull request?
Yeah, I did some general kind of privacy related kind of security blocks in terms of data access, but not explicitly. I did not explicitly implement anything that gives the user control over their data per se. So, I mean, not that there's a lot of data that the user can control, but I believe this is something we can visit later when it actually becomes a concern, when we actually have a lot of data that we're gathering. Since we're not really gathering data on users right now, we're just have kind of like a content creation platform instead of like a data gathering kind of behavior monitoring platform. But yeah, something to visit later, but just a little note for now.
Yeah, and I agree with that approach. I think the most important thing when we do move towards bringing on, more users, I think after milestone 3 would be a good point to have a big push to try and bring on some users to test the system. And at that point, we should perhaps have in our login process some more clarity about promoting our privacy policy so people see it and getting explicit consent. That's one issue that we could have if we don't actually get that consent when people sign on to the project.
Yeah, and keeping track of when they consented and giving the end user clear explanation of what they're consenting to. Okay, looks like we've lost Mitchell. I do recall that this the phone connection has a 30-minute timeout, so that's a good way to remember that our meeting has gone long. It's, I guess, because they're providing a free phone service, they only allow call-in participants to stay on the line for 30 minutes. Mitchell may be able to dial back in. Are there any other comments about the privacy ideas? I think I agree with what you've said, Juhi, about taking it step by step. Okay, if there are no other comments, are there any other issues anyone would like to bring? Otherwise, we can wrap up this meeting. Okay, can anybody hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
I can at least.
Yep, all right.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, thanks. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your time and efforts with CiviWiki, and have a great week and see you on GitHub.
Yeah, see you next week.
Bye, everyone.